Welcome everybody. Welcome to our webinar, our WhyTry webinar. So happy to have everybody on. Those that are coming back that have been on previous webinars, welcome back. Always grateful to have you. And for any that are new, welcome. This is a fun place to be, and I'm really excited for the discussion that we're going to be having. So my name is Jason Johnson. I represent the WhyTry Organization. We're the organization that hosts these webinars. I've been doing this since 2020. I've put in, I think, over 80 of these, and just really fun. We have panelists on to have important discussions that are relevant to education and mental health and student support. And overall, the big picture concept usually touches on the topic of resilience. That's kind of our organizational expertise, is the topic of resilience. Our organization's been around for about 20 years. We provide training, staff development, toolkit, and resources to help adults teach students, clients the skills of resilience. And in the process, we started this free webinar series that has just been, it's turned into a really fun community. And I feel so grateful to be a part of it. So before I introduce our topic and our subject, or excuse me, our topic and our co-panelists, let's go over just a couple of logistical things. We are scheduled to be together for about an hour today. We'll target that depending on the discussion. We may go a few minutes over, but we'll target going about an hour. The other thing I'll mention, we are on a webinar link, which means myself and my co-panelist Joe today, we're the only ones with live cameras and mics. So we can't see or hear the rest of you. But we do have a live chat, and so we will use that. And so if you have questions as we're talking, feel free to throw them in the chat, and we'll do our best to respond and acknowledge them. One thing that's helpful in the chat, if you're willing to make the adjustment, is open up your chat where you type in a message, and right above where you type your message, it says to, and then there's a little drop down menu. And that drop down menu is where you select who you're sharing your message with. That should say to everyone. If it says to everyone, then everyone can see your comments. If that does not say to everyone, if it says to hosts and panelists or to something else, then not everyone can see your comments. So if you're willing to adjust that to everyone, that is helpful. After you've made that adjustment, go ahead and throw an emoji into the chat that describes that expresses how your week is going so far. Hit us with your emoji react in the chat. Margarita, no, that tells us how how your week is going so far. I love it. The reactions are, I can empathize with every single one of them. Thank you. I always get a kick out of it, and you never fail to impress. You are so good with the emoji game. It is. It's oh, Friday, Lisa. You really need to trademark that, because that's exactly what it is. Friday afternoon is officially Friday, and I'm here for it. All right. Well, thank you for doing that. Looks good. Let me introduce our topic, and then I'll introduce our panelists. So today we are going to continue a discussion we started a couple weeks ago around trauma. Our official title today is From Awareness to Action, Advancing Trauma Responsive Practices in Schools. And this is going to be a little bit of a continuation of a discussion we had with our same panelists a couple weeks ago around trauma, where we really focused on trauma with our students. Today, I suspect the discussion is going to lean a little more around the adult facilitator and teacher and educator role within that. And I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's a really important discussion. So my panelists that I've got back with me, welcome back. That Joe, you may be the first panelist that's gone back to back. We've had two
Wow.
timers, three timers, and I think either a four or five timer, but to put it in the Saturday Night Live language. But I think you're our first back to back panelist. Really appreciate it. So to give Joe a proper introduction, this is Joe Antonelli, a veteran school administrator with deep expertise in behavior, trauma informed practices, restorative approaches, and de escalation. He served in continuation high schools, trained educators nationwide, and consults with schools and districts across the U.S. A longstanding board member of the California Continuation Education Association, two-time administrator of the year, teaches in a graduate education program at the University of Redlands, current PhD candidate, and you're so close, so close. You can
Yes.
taste it. Authored a book called Bottom Up, created the course Trauma and Behavior for Educators, and co-authored a resilience-focused paper with Stanford's Gardner Center. Currently serving as administrator in the Corona Norco Unified School District in Southern California. Joe, welcome back. Thank you so much for coming back on.
Thanks for having me twice in a row. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I love it. And then I am Jason Johnson. My background is I am a school psychologist, published work on the topic of adolescent resilience, worked for the largest school district in the state of Utah, which is my home state. And I'm currently the director of training for the WhyTry organization and get the opportunity to deliver staff development on resilience throughout the country to educators, mental health professionals throughout the country. Absolutely love what I do. This is one of my favorite things that I get to do, though. And so, with that, let's just jump right into it. And so, Joe, what I'm going to ask you to do is, as we respond, probably good to remember that we have a mix of people that probably heard our first discussion and then probably some that haven't. And so, if we can have you maybe just give a little bit of background on some of these topics that I ask you about, just to catch people up. But I want to jump right into kind of trauma in the adult world to set the table for this. So the first time we met, you talked and emphasized that behavior change starts with the adults. I thought it was a really good reminder. Could you talk a little bit more about how an educator's own past trauma or even secondary trauma, which some may or may not be aware of, can affect how they respond to student behavior and what we can do about it? And I think that'll set us up nicely for where this goes.
Yeah, I'd love to. And I'm going to share some slides. And so let me pop on that. And um, one moment, please. And here we go, slideshow view. Don't mind that. So when we're looking at trauma, we have to remember, because so much of the time we spend talking about kids and their adverse childhood experiences and or trauma, and we act like there's this invisible line that happens in our brains when we turn 18 or 21 and we can kind of shut it off. But the truth is, our brains are wired for danger and the response to danger, or actually our brains are wired for survival in a high threat environment. So once the radar goes on with early childhood traumatic experiences or childhood stressors or adverse childhood experiences, whatever you'd like to call them, once that radar goes on, it does not want to go off. Those neurological pathways that are developed in response to a dangerous situation stay on our radar as we go into adulthood. And that means that, Jason, like you were talking earlier before we started, the responses that we have as kids are still the responses often when we are stressed that we will have as adults, because we learn those as children. This is how I survived this dangerous situation, and we now often unconsciously just respond that way. It also changes our worldview when we start with a childhood full of adversity, we start to believe certain things about the world, that it's dangerous, or our role as our how much power we have, how much external power there is, and all of that follows us into adulthood. Um, I am on the wrong, there we go. And so we want to look at, the fact that those neural pathways will last a lifetime unless we change them. Now, the good thing about neuroplasticity, the idea that the brain changes throughout life, is that even if we do have somebody who has a lot of adverse childhood experiences or ACEs early on in life, we can change those neural pathways, and we can change them in childhood where it's a little bit easier when we're working with our kids in K-12. But as adults, we also have the capacity to change our responses. And I know Jason's background is in psychology. There's, what's it called? The stability of behavior. The older we get, the more stable our behaviors become. We kind of become entrenched in those. So even though we might think that, hey, I'm stuck with the brain I have, the truth is we can change our behavior throughout time. Um, and a couple of quick things when we're looking at adverse childhood experiences, the addictive behaviors that we see being correlated with ACEs and childhood trauma don't stop when we're 18. So it's not just the kid who gets caught in high school with, weed or whatever. It's also, we have addictive behaviors that will follow us, and that could be, drug, alcohol, sex, gambling, shopping, whatever addiction that is firing off those little bursts of dopamine that we're so desperate for. And also we can't ignore that when we have a lot of childhood adversity, mental health issues just kind of often come piled on with that. Uh, with our adults, some of the stuff that we see, and again, I shouldn't say adults, with people who have had a lot of adversity, we do see hypervigilance, and that's that brain's response to, hey, I feel that there's danger around, and I can't really let my guard down because my brain wants me to stay alive. So if I am in a dangerous situation, or if I perceive life to be dangerous, and that could be my staff meeting, or I'm going to be hyper vigilant, and if I'm hyper vigilant and I'm ready for something bad to happen, it probably means I'm operating with a hair trigger. Like I'm gonna go into fight, flight, freeze pretty quickly. So, and one of the things that can trigger us is when we are in an environment where we're exposed to people who have had similar adversity to us. And as somebody who's worked in continuation schools, that's always a challenge, is finding staff members who, and Jason talked about, resilience, who have built up the resilience to be exposed day after day after day to the same traumas that they grew up with, and not end up with secondary trauma, and not or, compassion fatigue and all those kind of undesirable responses when we're working with kids. And this kind of goes, if anybody is in an alt ed environment or a high needs Title I environment, I do want to throw this out, because we often will be in an interview, and it's like, we want somebody who gets our kids, right? Like not everybody gets our kids at a continuation school, or in a Title I school, or a school where the kids have a lot of adversity. And so sometimes we'll look for adults who are interviewing who are coming from the same neighborhoods that these kids are coming from, and think, well, this person's going to have so much empathy toward these kids. And then they get hired and we're like, oh my gosh, there's very little empathy here. We can see, we can see it diverge into a couple of responses. One is these poor children, pobrecitos, these kids can't do this. They're, there's a difference between nurturing and keeping kids from having to try to progress out of their current state. And that's where we have that dynamic of low expectations. And that doesn't help anyone move forward out of an adverse childhood. And then the other side of it is kind of almost traumatic snobbery. I had bad stuff happen to me and I made it. And if you can't pull yourselves up by your own bootstraps, then, you're the problem. And so, sometimes we have to be really careful when we're bringing people into our environments, and kind of keep our eyes open for those types of behaviors. And often those are trauma responses on their own. Uh, so if you are one of those people, if you know one of those people, what can we do? Well, I think the first thing is to be very honest with yourself. Like, what are my experiences in life? Like, what did I grow up with? And you can take an ACEs quiz, and that will give you a quick idea of kind of where you are on that. As far as how your childhood stacks up. By the way, quick note about the ACEs quiz. If you do take one, please do not give it to your students. This is unless you have like a team of psychologists waiting to work with the kids. We don't want to trigger the kids, but for adults, it's a good idea to just take a gander at some of those. They're 10 questions long, with usually 10 questions related to what adversity you might have experienced, and then a couple of questions related to what resilient or protective factors were involved in your childhood. And that kind of can give you a quick glimpse of how you stack up, how your childhood stacked up. Understand that therapy works. It really does. So like if you're kind of struggling with a trauma response yourself, it does work. And there are many types of therapy. You've got talk therapy, you've got cognitive behavior therapy, dialectical behavior therapy. We've got new therapies like EMDR, which is an eye movement related therapy. There's transcranial stimulation, all these cool things that can help reduce that trauma response. But I think one of the critical questions that we have to ask ourselves, and this is actually a question that we often had at the continuation school, is this environment healthy for me? Do I need to get out? Do I have a shelf life if I'm working with the neediest kids? Like, is there a point where I can tap out and not feel like I'm giving up on these kids, or I'm letting anybody down, but more that I'm protecting myself? And and that is something that we see time and time again at the continuation schools, is people overstaying their shelf lives and then ending up having those secondary trauma responses and burnout and that kind of stuff. And some of those symptoms can be, the exhaustion every day. I'm exhausted coming to work, or I don't have a lot of motivation. The compassion fatigue that can happen over time. Like, I just don't want to hear anyone else complain, or I don't care how bad their home environment is. I just want them to behave right now. We can start to see it in our personal lives with sleep issues. And food issues, appetite changes. And the appetite changes can go both ways. It can be like that high cortisol, high stress response of eating everything that you can find, or it can be shunning food altogether. So just being aware of appetite changes. We can see changes in our relationships and our ability to attach with other people. Sometimes, again, kind of like appetite, overly attached versus really self-isolating. Just again, it's a protective factor. Hopelessness and panic attacks, and then those addictive behaviors that I talked about earlier can pop in. So those are some of the things that as adults we need to be aware of, and they're amplified when we are working with kids who have had a lot of adversity in their childhoods. And just this is for people who just might want the slide deck. When we're looking at real quick for the mental health professionals, when we're looking at the DSM, like these are some of the things that we see, mental health issues that are initially inspired, if you will, by childhood adversity or traumatic experiences. And you can kind of see from that list, it's a lot of different stuff, but it's also like a lot of the stuff that we struggle with as educators with kids. So that's just more for your reference if you're looking at the slide deck later. All right. And we can roll in.
Yeah, I love it. I love it, Joe. And I think it's so important to understand, because this is by no means a suggestion that we should only have like one type of staff in schools. Like it's great. I think every staff is going to be a combination of, you may have staff members that are high on the ACEs and you may have staff members that are low, but understanding that is helpful for both the staff and the administration. I remember when I started as a school psych, the thing I was probably least prepared for, like I went in, I wanted to help the students, and I knew that a school was like an ecosystem of sorts, but I was really only viewing it as like all the students and me. And what I was really underprepared for was the impact that the adult cohort within the building has on that ecosystem as well. And the goal is symbiosis, but to make that work, you have to have support for the grown-ups, just like you have support for the kiddos, because they all respond to each other. And I would catch myself, I would like have an interaction with a student and it would like rile up my own insecurity that I know goes like way back to when I was younger. And I'm thinking, how do I respond properly to this? And then I would see other grown-ups and I would see examples of great responses and examples of responses that may have provoked the situation more. And I realized that there are these multifaceted cohorts within the ecosystem that have to make it work. And so this discussion of how trauma impacts the grown-ups, I think, is so vital and so underexplored, because it impacts everything all the way down to what the students go through.
Well,
Go
can I
ahead.
jump in? Because what you're saying is so critically important. And I think it's going to be really interesting with the audience right now, because you have people who are in the classroom, you have people who are support services, and then you also have some leaders in there. And I think what you're talking about is how important it is for leadership from the top down to be treating the adults the way we want the adults to treat the kids. Because if we're saying, like, based on like the Kaiser CDC ACEs study that got the ball rolling in the 1990s, safe, stable, nurturing relationships and environments is what helps somebody who has had a lot of trauma. We are saying to our teachers and our staff, hey, we want you to create safe, stable, nurturing relationships and environments for our kids. But if the school leaders and the district leaders aren't doing that for the adults, there's a hypocrisy, but there's also just like almost a physiological impossibility. If I'm an adult struggling with high stress and feeling afraid of my leadership, and then trying to like act like this entirely different human being with my students, like that's a big ask. So this is kind of an iterative process. Like it's got to start at the top and be modeled in order for this to hit the kids where we need it.
Love it. Great insight, by the way, in the chat. Thank you, Tim, Nolan. And Joe, I think there may have been requests. I don't know if it was this slide or the previous slide. There was a request to see. Yeah, put that one up just for a second while I ask you the next question. So one of the things that is obviously deeply impacted by this is behavior and behavior situations, behavior escalations. So you've talked previously about the brain's 22-minute return to baseline after escalation, which I think is such a smart reminder. Wondering if you could just give us a brief review of that. And then based on that, what are some of the most effective strategies that educators can use in that window to co-regulate with students, especially in those high stress moments? Because that's where, it really becomes so critical. It feels like every move is critical.
Absolutely. So yeah, the idea of co-regulating is so essential. And it, just so that we're all on the same page, co-regulating is basically trying to stay calm while the person we're with is not calm. And from a physiological perspective, there are some impediments. Like we are naturally attuned to kind of escalate when somebody around us is escalating. It's that herd mentality. It's our mirror neurons in action. Like we mimic other people's actions. And there are times when it's relatively easy to co-regulate, when we don't know the person well, when we're not the focus of their anger, and we know we're not the focus of their anger. Like when we're calm and not feeling stressed. Again, that goes back to how are our adults feeling when they're interacting with the kids? If the adults are already stressed, then that ability to co-regulate is going to be really, really difficult. Um, so, we kind of going along with what we're talking about. You can watch a kid have a tantrum and stay completely calm. You're just sitting there and you're like, little Joey's having a tantrum. When it's not our kid, when we're not in the middle of Target, the kid isn't yelling, "Get away from me, don't touch me," and a whole bunch of people are looking, going, "Oh my gosh, I'm calling CPS on this person. He's a terrible father," right? So like co-regulating is often very situational. Like we can now, if we are one of the people watching that kid have the tantrum in the middle of the aisle at Target, and we're watching the parent, we can sit there and just be very empathetic and just be like, "Oh gosh, that's just awful." But if we're the parent, it's going to be a lot harder for us to co-regulate because now we're stressed as well. So a kind of being able to self-monitor is so important for us to be able to catch ourselves and be able to co-regulate. But when the train leaves the station, going back to that 22-minute thing. So typically from the stimulus, like the stimulus of danger to the time our brain starts responding to the danger is super quick. It's like 0.2 seconds from the time we see the bear or the math teacher, whatever it might be, that is signaling to us that we are in danger, to the time our amygdala, our limbic system takes over, is about 0.2 seconds. So we go into protective mode very, very quickly. That's part of how we survive. We don't de-escalate nearly as quickly. So, we've got to look at the physiological responses that happen when we feel danger. Cortisol, our stress hormone, increases, and that starts a cascade of other things happening in the brain. So when cortisol shoots up, adrenaline shoots up, and that's important because what happens when adrenaline is released is blood sugar increases, respiration, heart rate, all those things increase, so that if that bear is coming at us, we can physiologically like respond, either fight or run from the bear. And we have to know that during that time, while we are in threat response mode, the part of our brain, that makes the wise and rational decisions, the prefrontal cortex, is offline. And the part of the brain that is in charge is the survival part, which is known as the limbic system. If we don't have any further bears or lions or math teachers jumping out at us, it takes about 22 minutes to calm down. So in that 22 minutes, though, it's critical, because what we do with kids in those 22 minutes is really, really important. And if you think about the kid who blows up in a classroom and security is called to pull the kid out, they're brought to the office, they're asked questions. Now that body is primed usually for fighting or flighting. And so it's got the adrenaline going, and we tell the kid to sit down, calm down. And we might even tell them they're in trouble. So at that point, we're heightening that danger. Like, now you're in trouble, even though, and so we have a kid who has already exhibited self-regulation skills for whatever got them in trouble in the first place. And now we're hitting them by asking them questions with a high cognitive load, which the prefrontal cortex is not engaged at that point. So physically, neurologically, not really capable of. Telling them to sit down or calm down is, again, kind of counter the physiology of what's going on with the person. And sometimes if there's a fight, and I understand how space works in small schools, trust me. Sometimes you have the kids sitting right next to the person who they got into a fight with. So now the threat is literally like 3 feet away. So those can add to the 22 minutes. And so what do we do? The first thing we have to do is realize during the 22 minutes, people are going to say stupid things. And this isn't just kids. This is us when we flip out on someone, our spouse or whatever. That's when we say all the stuff that about an hour later, we're going, "Oh my God, I wish I hadn't said that. I wish I could take it back." And our spouse has already written it down and, put it up on the refrigerator door. Like, "I will remember this forever that you said that, Joe." Um, so we've got to recognize that during that time when we're escalated, our responses, our verbal responses, are often going to be a reflection of being in fight or flight. And one thing that it's kind of good to remember is when you hear growling, like with an animal, Growling is a response to threat. This is saying, I don't want to fight you. I'm going to growl to make you go away. And so a human's version of growling can be, I'm going to kick that person's butt or whatever. It's to push people away. Unfortunately, as somebody who's worked in continuation schools for a long, long time, what I have seen is this is the time period when kids say things that get memorialized on their discipline chart that can turn a suspension into an expulsion. And part of it is if we keep poking the bear during that 22 minutes, you can get like completely dysregulated comments coming out of a kid's mouth that they really had no intention of saying and otherwise would not have. So how do we pass that time? Okay, you're out of school. That kid's body is ready for movement. Like they're pumped, right? They just did something, they're dysregulated. Fight or flight is in charge. Just try to allow for movement. If you can get that kid to take a walk, if you have a security attendant or somebody, who can safely walk the kid around and just give them movement time, that's helpful. And if we can project safety on our end, because a lot of times we want to project authority, which is not necessarily the same thing. So if we can project safety, if we do bring them into the office, like give them a bottle of water. Hey, I'm going to give you a bottle of water. Drink this. Have some music playing. We're going to talk in a little bit. But right now, and what I would always do, I would lie. Hey, Jason, you're the most important thing right now. I know you just blew up in class, but I have this email that the superintendent needs me to respond to, and I got to respond to my boss. And as soon as I'm done, you have 100% of my attention. And then I would like be shopping on Amazon for 15 minutes just to get while I have that kid having a bottle of water or something while he's de-escalating. And the kid I talked to 20 minutes, 25 minutes after the fight is an entirely different kid than I would have been talking to 5 minutes after the fight. Sometimes if you're working with younger kids, just have something to color. Just, a low cognitive task that requires some visual focus, but you want to burn the clock. And then once you have them kind of back down to baseline, now we can start the response process to whatever happened. And I mentioned mirror neurons. So we've got to realize that that's one of the challenges to co-regulation is when we're around someone and we see them escalate, our natural inclination is to escalate as well. And we might have had this happen like with our significant other, or maybe it's just me. But like if my wife gets really upset, I find myself probably starting to get upset as well, or starting to escalate. And it's a survival adaptation. It's because as when we were in a high threat environment, if we would see everybody running away, we're not going to stop and say, hey guys, what are you running from? While the lion comes and picks us off. We're just going to turn and run with the group and ask questions later. That's how our mirror neurons work. So we are neurologically wired to respond to whatever behavior we're seeing. So we do have to have that kind of self-awareness that this might be going on and be able to kind of disconnect ourselves from that person we're with. Let me see. Jason, is there
I had a couple thoughts on it. First of all, I think it's a helpful reminder. This is such a useful reminder on this. The amount of time it takes to de-escalate. And I one of the things I thought of is we sometimes don't realize when we ourselves are being pulled into that fight or flight mode as well, because we become, somewhat mechanical at moderating our response to at least be like socially acceptable. But if I have a kid that swears at me or spits at me or does something that really provokes me, like I may not be screaming at him, but internally I may still be in fight or flight mode. And so that 22-minute countdown is still applicable to me, because that means my prefrontal cortex also is not in its best decision-making mode as well. So that calm down period is great for the kiddo, but it's also really important for us as well to make sure we're not making things, worse. And so it just
And,
really
going
critical.
back, absolutely, and thinking of it as a classroom teacher, um, if I've already escalated because the kid is blown up in my class, I need a little separation in all likelihood from that kid if I can possibly get it. And if that's something that administration can help with, or security, or a co-teacher can help with, just so that I can return to baseline before I work with that kiddo. You're 100% with that.
Joe, Abigail asked a pretty important question in the chat. She said people who don't understand this may misconstrue what we're doing and think we're actually rewarding bad behavior by not immediately disciplining, or whatever that expected response might be from them. How can we help staff understand that it isn't rewarding bad behavior, that it's actually trying to encourage a more productive response?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question, and a lot of it I think has to do with training a staff. I think what happens is that people just go on what they've heard or what they've experienced in life, and a lot of what we think we know about behavior in the brain is not entirely accurate. I mean, if you go back, I think we talked about this in the first session, to just the year 2000, you could still, it was very common to find physicians who believed in the kind of sack of wet cement theory of the brain, that we're born with a brain, that the neural pathways kind of harden in childhood, and once we hit adulthood, that's the brain we are stuck with. And when you have physicians only a couple decades ago still being echoing that, I think that a lot of people have misconceptions about behavior, and this is where training is really, really important. And being able to explain to people, no, it doesn't mean that there's no consequences. In fact, if we have time to talk about restorative practices, that's one of those things where it's not that there are no consequences, it's that let's make the consequences something that we can that can be more productive, and that can actually change behavior, instead of making the consequences on um, related to something that happened after the actual behavior happened. And we just kept escalating this kid, and they double exploded on us. um,
I think I'm hoping we'll have time to get to it. Time flies on these.
yeah.
I do want to get to this next one because I think it's an interesting, helpful model. So you've given powerful examples of a thing you refer to as the four Fs: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn behavior. Could you give a little bit more info on that, and specifically how could educators get better at recognizing those trauma responses in the moment? Because I think that's a good thing that can help adjust our focus on that rather than on that reactive moment to the thing that's set us off.
Yeah. So I think being able to recognize some of these behaviors, it helps us intellectualize the behavior and not emotionally respond to it. So like if looking at, and by the way, these are super, super, super abbreviated lists. Like this is just because I know we have to move through it. But like the fight behavior, when we see somebody who's being loud or domineering or arguing, in addition to actual, physical fighting, these are relatively easy to recognize. And if we can respond to that by, hey, because it's a projection of, I don't feel safe. So if you can tell me what's wrong, I can help. Or even overtly saying, you're not in trouble. Or what I hear you, and I know this is going to sound very therapist-y, but what I hear you saying is, but sometimes being able to repeat back to the kid, this is what I hear you saying. Now we're going to get them to hopefully start to engage their prefrontal cortex, realize that they're not in danger, and we can start to de-escalate that kind of fight behavior. If we can give that person a little bit of physical space, that can help too. If we can get them outside, a little bit of just removing whatever that threat was, that can help de-escalate. So fight is kind of the most straightforward of the threat responses. I think flight is way more interesting, because we misconstrue this often. So let's look at some of the things that in a classroom can look like flight behavior. Now, think about this, and it's not just kids, because and Jason, I know you do plenty of staff development, right? Like as soon as you hit certain topics, everybody needs to use the bathroom. They're uncomfortable. It's like, I need to flee right now. They have their phones out. And, before we blow up kids for saying they're so disrespectful and they're on their phones and don't they know better, just think about being on a crowded elevator. Like the last time you were on a crowded elevator, suddenly everyone on the elevator has something of great importance to stare at. Even if there's no reception on the elevator, we all find solace in in having the phone out. It's a flight response. Playing video games is an ultimate flight because not only are you fleeing reality? Like if you think about Minecraft or a lot of these other games or Fortnite, you're literally going to another world. Like it is a total flight. We will see hyperactivity. This kid is just up and spinning around. And then things like not making eye contact. It's not necessarily a sign of disrespect. It can be a sign of I'm really afraid. I'm very nervous. I'm uncomfortable. But then we also see flight with attendance. And something, if you are an attendance person in a district, I never look at attendance as the problem. I look at it as the symptom of a problem. When we do, in California, we do SARB, Student Attendance Review Boards, which is usually our greatest attendance issues. We do a formal board hearing and we'll have all sorts of people from different services involved. It's never as simple as the kid hasn't been coming to school for 6 months. Hey, Joe, why don't you come to school? And the kid's like, oh, okay, that did it. Like there's always a host of underlying problems. And again, tardiness. Is the kid avoiding the class? Are they a little nervous about the class? So what do? We want to reassure, we want to affirm them, walk them through the worry, and overt statements like you can do this, like I believe in you, you've got this. Start to lower that. By the way, Rome was not built in a day. You're not going to see a class go from high flight behavior to sitting there with their arms folded, going, "Okay, Mr. Antonelli, now I will sit here." Like it doesn't happen that, but this is the direction to be moving in. But going with what Jason was just saying, in order for us to emotionally divest ourselves from these behaviors, if we remember that flight is not intentional disrespect, they're not doing this to us. They are doing it because they are experiencing a physiological response. It helps us respond much more calmly and co-regulate. Freeze is fascinating when you look at the freeze response. So think of a rabbit, think of a deer in headlights, not engaging. So it's that kid who's sitting there, you put the worksheet in front of them and they don't move. And you think you've given all the clearest instructions possible and he's still sitting there. And you walk by him and you say, Jason, do you know what you need to do? And Jason says, because he knows what gets rid of me, yes, Mr. Antonelli, I know exactly what I need to do. Okay, and I go and walk around the room, and now Jason has the threat removed. Like I'm not there, but his prefrontal cortex still isn't engaged, and he's still looking at a worksheet, going, I can't even start, right? And then that person who's zoning out or sitting without doing anything. Often we use the L word, lazy, to describe these. Symptoms. But if we kind of stop and say, because lazy is something that the kid is doing. If it's a response to threat, now it's on me as the adult to try to figure out, well, what is threatening about this environment here? So lazy is a very easy word for us to just push off the responsibility. But if we take a more diagnostic approach and go, what's the pushback? Now, one of the things we can do with this kid, by the way, the Jason who's sitting there, is we circle back to him. And it's like, Jason, let's start by putting your name on the paper. You can do that, right? And wait for him to put his name on the paper. Well, let's look at number one. Let me walk you through number one. Do you know? And again, if you make the mistake of saying, do you know what to do? Jason will immediately say, yes, of course I know what to do, because now you will go away. So now let's look at number one. Let's walk through number one. And you walk with them through number one, and then maybe you have to walk with them a little bit through number two, and then it's like riding a bike, and you hopefully can let them start pedaling on their own as you start to lower that fear response. The other thing that we will see with freeze sometimes are somatic issues, the headaches and stomach aches that you'll see with a lot of kids who are just in paralyzed mode. So when that kid has headaches or stomach aches and the doctor is saying there's nothing wrong with them, this can be more of a stress response. My favorite is actually fawning. because we love fawners. Okay, and I'm going to tell you right now, as an administrator, I am totally guilty of this. Give me a staff full of fawners because they are the people who can't say no. They have no boundaries. So when I say, hey, I need some people on the school site council, and we meet from 4 to 6 on Wednesday nights. Um, Jason, would you mind doing that? And I know Jason's like, okay. I love my fawners. Now, if we look, and we love our kids who are fawners, right? They're the peacemakers. They laugh at our jokes. They sit in the front. They will do anything to avoid conflict. Super compliant. They're the ones who are like, quiet, quiet, the teacher's talking. They're great until we realize that this might be kind of a toxic response, and we need to like help them get their sense of strength and sense of self back to them. So we want to try to build safe relationships where they do feel safe enough and confident enough to say, I don't really want to do that. I don't really agree with that. Or this is what I think. And that's really what we're looking for with the fawn behaviors. So yes, I am. I do admit that I am guilty of taking advantage of those folks. Um, so Jason, any
Yeah, I one of the things that came to mind, especially during the freeze and the fawning, I think those two are particularly tricky. Where, and I've seen so many educators that are hesitant to kind of jump in and facilitate when it comes to the freezing behavior or the fawning behavior because they're worried they're creating codependence or they're kind of adding fuel to the behavior that they're trying to prevent. And I think it's a helpful reminder. This is one of those spaces where I think as educators, we have to learn to apply in all areas the things, the concepts we believe in. And so one of the things we believe in when it comes to like academic instruction is the idea of scaffolding, right? I'm going to offer you added assistance to do this thing that you can't do on your own, and then slowly pull the scaffold back. Like it's a critical piece, especially in the world of special ed accommodations. But the same thing applies to behavior as well. And with that, and this is what we're ultimately, really trying to impact. And so I may have to scaffold my support. Like I may have to step in and do this thing with you, even though I'm worried that I may be contributing to your codependence, or I may have to like lean into this thing in the name of scaffolding. Like we're going to do this together, and I'm already plotting how I'm going to begin to scale this back. But in the name of getting the proper behavior going, we're going to start and implement the support. And it's somehow, I think it's harder when it comes to behavior than it is in academics and instruction, because that behavior piece, I think it triggers something inside of us internally, more instinctively. And we're trying so hard to get to this final behavior spot, but we have to do it in a gradual way in many cases.
I think we had talked a little bit about the antecedent behavior consequence, order of things, and I think this is one of those areas like what you're talking about is focusing a lot on the consequence, but maybe not looking more at the antecedent, like why is this behavior happening? And it makes me think of the term attention-seeking behavior, and we've not talked about this, but I will say I'm not a huge fan of that because it has a negative connotation. And like I lifeguarded for a long, long time. Doing this is attention-seeking behavior. If I was just sitting there on the lifeguard chair going, that Jason's out there in the water, obviously he's just looking for attention. I'm not a very good lifeguard, and I probably will not be employed for very long. So sometimes when we're looking at extinguishing behaviors, with the ABA model and all that, that might be the later approach, but we also want to look at the foundational, like what is driving this behavior. And we can go way into the weeds with this one, but and piggybacking what you're saying with instructional approaches, this is where I really, really like project-based learning. Because when we can craft a project that the students can meet or enter the project at their own individual skill level, and each kid can show growth from that project, Okay, it's not as easy as doing a worksheet. Absolutely not. But then if we get full engagement in the classroom, it's a lot less headache. And if we start to see growth with the kids, and that can also lower that freeze response when we realize, hey, I can actually do this assignment right from the start. Like I get it. And he's letting me like do what I know instead of so yeah. Um,
Awesome. I love it. Geez, time flies. Here's
yep.
what I'm thinking I want to do. I want to jump to part 5 and see if we can go through. I think some of those recommendations are important. And then I think what we'll do is maybe give a teaser of part 4 because I think that's a really interesting subject. But let's I want to jump to this one because I want to make sure we get to this. Um, what are some, we've talked about trauma responsive campuses, how it starts with prevention, creating these safe environments. A lot of these terms have become um, almost like colloquialisms that we hear and just kind of go,
Right.
okay, what does it actually look like? And then specifically, what does it look like outside of the classroom when we talk about like a trauma responsive campus? How do we build this into our hallways during transitions, our offices?
Yeah, I think so much of the burden with a lot of when we're talking about, trauma responsive practices, it lands on the teachers. And I have a real problem with that. When you look at, I think it's the next slide. Yeah. Um, like John Hattie did some research on what the talk time with kids and teachers is in a classroom. And, I just did a little math in the first part of this. You got 35 kids in your class, you've got a 55-minute period. Even if every kid gets an absolutely equal amount of interaction with the teacher, it's about 90 seconds. That's in a like an unbelievable ideal world. And let's just keep going for a 6-period day in this perfect environment of perfectly equitable discussions. That's about 10 minutes of talk time between an adult and a student with on a daily basis. So, and that's with six teachers. Like, if we expect teachers to not only create these welcoming environments and be able to work academically with the kids, but also, be providing some of the extra supports, it's a way too much of an ask. And when we look at the other adults on campus who do have the potential to spend more time with the kid. Um, let's be honest, on a lot of campuses, your security attendants are standing around for a good chunk of the day. Like, unless the school is a Wild West, like there are times the security attendants looking at their watch, looking for something to do. So now, if we can train our support staff, our classified employees, our secretaries, our custodians, any adult, they don't need to be psychologists. They just need to know like how to work with kids and how to help. To be that first line of defense and to know how to appropriately work and talk with kids. That can do so much. It takes some of the burden off the teachers, a lot of the burden off the teachers, and it does create that environment that you're talking about, which is this overall, like from the time the kid steps through the gate in the morning, every adult is greeting them. And if we think about a day in the life of our student, like think about it like making a video of a day in the life of a student at my school. What does it look like? So they walk through the gates. What is the approach of the adults, and especially our kiddos who are tardy? Because like I don't know about you. Maybe I'm the only one in the group who's ever been late for a meeting. A little uncomfortable, right? Like you're walking in, you're already feeling shame and horror and dread. Like you don't want to open the door. Like how we greet kids, especially when they're already feeling worried, can do a lot to not necessarily for today, but are they going to be tardy again tomorrow? Are they going to feel like, okay, I don't have to worry tomorrow. I can show up. So remember that every interaction with the kid is an opportunity for growth and to be supportive and nurturing with them. So and okay, if there are admin in the room, um, how we greet kids is important. Get out of your office in the morning. You should be at the front gate. You should be walking around campus. You should be visible. And, and our psychologists too. I will say that like you're, every adult, like that visibility piece is huge. And I'm sure Jason probably talks about this in some of his trainings. Like when you look at the measurable effects of standing at the door, that's a visibility thing. Standing at the door between passing periods, greeting kids as they come in, there is an effect, a learning effect, and an amount of usable class time that results in just that one interaction. So very simply, I mean, that's, every adult can help, and taking the burden off just solely the teachers is critical.
I think that's so apt, and it is. It's the culture. I will regularly ask when I'm doing training. I'll say, and I can do the same thing here in education. Raise your hand if you have more stuff to do than you have time to do it. Every hand will go up, right? That's the nature of education, and so it's very easy to kind of box ourselves in with actual paperwork that has to get done, all those things. But it does come with a cost if we're not stepping out during those transition times, and if we're not taking advantage of those interactions. Every interaction between a child and an adult is an opportunity.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're running right into the time barrier here.
Let's why don't you tease us just a little bit with a brief discussion on restorative practices? I'm okay if you're okay if we go a couple minutes over. So, restorative practices has come up multiple times. 3 webinars ago, I had a great discussion with my friends Gerald and Scott, who are restorative practices experts in Missouri and in Las Vegas, Nevada. And it continues to come up. It's one of those things that sometimes can be met with a little bit of resistance. And I think even in this discussion around trauma, the natural endpoint for a great solution would be a recommendation of getting trained on restorative practices. So how do you approach the challenge around restorative practices of staff resistance, particularly if leaders aren't bought in or just don't know if it's the right fit?
Right. So I'm a trainer of restorative practices. So like I've been down this road many times where the staff walks in very reluctant because they think it's, as the slide suggests, a get out of jail free card, or everybody, all the hippies dancing around the maypole, and everybody's going to sing songs and hold hands. And I think what we have to do is dispel that notion, because 80 to 90% of restorative practices has to do with creating an environment where there is connection and community. Because so that there is something to restore, first of all, for 2 reasons. Let me real quick. So that one, we tend to behave in accordance with the group that we are affiliated with, that we belong to. And that could be school, that could be a classroom, that could be Boy Scouts, that could be the gang. Whatever it is, we will follow the rules of whatever we feel that we are a part of. So making kids a part of our environment is that the majority critical mass of restorative practices. The meetings after stuff goes wrong is what gets all the press with RP. And it is really important for us to focus on the preventative stuff, because then the restorative meetings make a lot more sense once and also, look, you can't have a restorative conference or a restorative meeting if the kid hates being in your class, hates coming to school, is not affiliated in his mind with your organization. There's nothing to restore at that point. So that's the quick highlight of, yeah, we got to build everything in the beginning in order for there to be something of value to restore. And that's when restorative practices really, really works well. And if you're in the criminal justice system, restorative justice, RJ versus RP, but it does work. And so, yes, I'm over my time. I'm trying to shut up.
You're doing great. I'm trying to think how I want to wrap this up. So, oh, thank you. A few people have requested some information from Tim. He's going to share that with me, and then we'll send out contact information. We'll just get a dialogue going. And for those that have questions or want follow up, in fact, I'll put some contact slides up here in a minute. But maybe for concluding thoughts, Joe, I'm going to really put you on the spot here. I apologize, but I also don't apologize. Education's at an interesting moment right now. I think educators feel pretty pretty beat up and vulnerable right now. What what message of hope would you share with your fellow educators right now to help and encourage them to stay the course?
I think there, okay, two things come to mind. One, um, the more we build a community among ourselves, the stronger we are, and the more resilient we are. So reach out. Like it's gonna be, or it's gonna be tough. There's no way around. Like public education is under assault right now. So it is something where we do have to circle the wagons, and I don't necessarily mean that like even in a giant organizational way, but just with each other, with our peers, with our colleagues. And then the other thing is you got to have hope. It's going to get what like sometimes things get bad, but then they rebound when people realize these are our kids, these are our children that we're talking about. And we've got to really have hope that even if we're in for a dark time, after the dark ages came the Renaissance, right? Like it's not going to last forever. And rely on each other, be there for each other.
I love it. I absolutely agree. My addition would be to that would be keep showing up. You're making a bigger difference than it probably feels like you are right now. These kiddos need you, the community needs you, and educators are incredible examples of resilience. And right now is kind of unprecedented in the difficulty of it of things, but we're doing it. And this is, I think kiddos need great educators now more than they ever have. And we're going to do it. And that community piece that Joe said, I echo 1,000%. Continue to connect yourselves to great communities, become part of, find the great communities. I think this is an awesome one. It's like I said, it's one of the things I'm most proud of that we have this and keep showing up. We need you.
Absolutely.
Joe, you did fantastic. Here's what I'm gonna do. So not to over disclose what's going on in Joe's life, but Joe, you've got some important events coming up professionally and personally. And what I want to do is after you get on the other side of your next big event, and we're able to add a few more initials after your name. I want to have you back, and I want to continue the discussion, and we can dig into restorative practices and some other things. I think there's still a lot of layers to peel back, and so if you're game, Joe, I think you've got some people that really continually appreciate the content that you bring, and I'd love to throw it out there.
I would love to. Yes. Just let me get through the next like month and a half and then I'm all yours.
I hear you, man. We're gonna be cheering for you. You're gonna do it, and you're gonna continue to leverage that to continue to do great things. Hey, huge round of applause to our panelist Joe Antonelli for always bringing great and important content. Thank you to all of our attendees that showed up.